My name is Tyler. I work alongside Colin at Venerable. And recently, I did a bunch of research into DMARC, and I thought that it would probably be a good idea for everybody to know who doesn't know DMARC, because it's a pretty big integral part of how to prevent domain spoofing in email. So according to Mandiant's report, 14% of initial infection vectors were due to phishing email. These sophisticated phishing attacks often involved domain spoofing through various methods such as like direct send, authenticated SMTP, etc. So while ongoing user education does remain like the best way to prevent spoofing, there are other measures that can be implemented to reduce the amount of phishing emails that come in, especially if people are trying to spoof your own domain, or just try to reduce the amount of phishing emails that go to other companies as well. So DMARC is the domain-based message authentication, reporting, and conformance framework for enforcing SPF and or DKIM checks. It doesn't need both. It can do one or the other. And it also provides different reporting, such as authentication and forensics reporting. The forensics reporting, like in an email, will send the entirety of the header. The authentication just shows if it fails or not. There's 3 different policies. There's quarantine, there's none, and then there's reject. None is just the monitoring only mode. Quarantine just sends the emails to quarantine, and then outright rejects the email. This is all done by setting up a simple DMARC DNS record. This can be done through various different tools, or you can set it up yourself. So basically, here's a graph on how the DMARC works. So you publish a record to the DNS server, and whenever someone sends an email from your domain or trying to spoof your domain, it checks both the SPF and the DKIM. If either or fails, it will fail the DMARC, and then it depends on your DMARC policy what happens with that email. So SPF is the sender policy framework, which is a record of all the permitted senders that are allowed to send emails on behalf of your domain. This is a list of IPs that are just kept in a DNS text record, wherever your DNS records are kept. The domain keys identified mail, or DKIM, is just email signing using your organization's private key. And then the public key is kept in a DNS record for recipients to verify the authenticity of your email. So how they work with DMARC, like I said, if either of them fail, DMARC fails. The results depend on what you set your DMARC policy to. There is a pretty big note: if you don't have an SPF or a DKIM record, either one will fail automatically. It just says record does not exist. So it's a great way to set up DMARC on domains that are not used to send email. Just don't set up the records, but set up a DMARC record, and the DMARC will automatically fail. And if you just set it to reject, that domain just can't be spoofed, at least through DKIM, because it'll automatically fail. There are some shortcomings. SPF and DKIM records, if they're not maintained properly, it won't work properly. You have to make sure that you have a full list of all the IPs that are sending email on behalf of your domain, and make sure that the public-private key pair is kept up to date and rotated if that's organizational policy. If the DMARC records and reports are in XML format, which I know is not everybody's favorite format to look at, I know it's personally not my favorite. So they're a little gross, especially when you're trying to do a hands-on investigation and you're looking at XML and you're just trying to get the most pertinent information. And then SPF also has some limits. There's a recursive lookup limit of 10, which will, if you exceed that, it breaks SPF. There's a void lookup limit of 2, which breaks it. And then SPF records also have a 255 character length limit, which sucks for large organizations with a lot of IPs and a lot of domains. And then SPF also fails for forwarded messages. So if I forward a message from my coworker to someone either internally or externally, it's gonna fail no matter what. But there are some ways to get around this. SPF flattening, which is kind of complex and doesn't really scale well. Or you could just not create SPF or DKIM records, like I said before, for any domains or subdomains that aren't really being used to send email, and just set the DMARC record to reject. There's also ways, if you don't like XML, to help with that. So DMARCian has a free tool to write a DMARC record for you. There's also some paid stuff depending on what your organization wants to do. But I included a link here, and if anybody wants the slides later, I can send it to them. And then there's also some open source tools like the one listed. There's also really nice XML viewers that are free and open source that it might be a little easier as well, instead of just having to go for a full-on new tool. And then I included a bunch of resources in case anybody is interested, again, in the slides. Any questions? Unsure, because I have not looked at it. What happens if you put a plus all into the end of your SPF record? I'm unsure, haven't really researched that far into SPF records. I know the amount of IPs in an SPF record, if it's a 255 character limit, ends up breaking it, but a plus all I don't think would be parsed correctly through DNS or anything looking up a SPF check. Yes, however, you can't do. Can you list entire like CIDR blocks in an SPF record? I believe you can. I believe SPF though isn't IPv6 compatible. It's only IPv4, which is another limitation with a lot of companies trying to move to IPv6 and that whole debacle. But entire CIDR blocks are allowed. However, again, it breaks the recursive lookup limit if it goes past that 10. So having entire CIDR blocks is kind of not great if you're trying to limit the amount of IPv4 IPs that are in that record. In the back? I did not. Did I research DMARC aggregators at all? I did not.